Speaker Pelosi and her colleagues are advertising it as a package of urgent measures to save American democracy. Their bill would make Election Day a new paid holiday for government workers, a power grab that's smelling more and more like exactly what it is.
A Democratic power grab, well, that's how you just heard Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell describing a bill that would make Election Day a national holiday and other steps to make it easier to vote. We're going to discuss this with Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks in just a moment. But first, for some perspective, let's bring Andrew back in on this. Andrew?
And Rich, McConnell's complaints about this bill that would make voting easier would hold a lot more weight had he and his fellow Republicans not spent so much time, money, and energy to keep people from voting. But that's the clear direction he and his colleagues have aimed for in recent years. Voter ID laws, limiting early voting days, times, and locations, limiting automatic voter registration, prohibitions on felons voting, and voter intimidation, all happening and all aimed at stopping people from voting, stopping certain people from voting, I should say. First of all, there's an odd irony in McConnell, the senior senator from Kentucky, from opposing an election holiday because it already is a holiday in Kentucky. State workers in the bluegrass state get presidential election days off, and they get paid for the day as well. But the state also tries to make sure that other workers, the ones who don't work for the state, have a hard time voting too. Polls in Kentucky close at 6 p.m. on election nights. That's the earliest closing time in the nation, just a few minutes after most people get off work. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, why do we vote on a Tuesday in November at all? Surely there must be better days and better months. For the answer, you have to go back in time and onto the farm. Early November was picked because it was after prime planting season and before the winter hit. And Tuesday was picked because it took all day to get to your polling place by horse or wagon if you left your farm on a Monday. And while there's lots to talk about making it easier to vote, the Brennan Center for Justice notes that since 2010, 25 new restrictions have been put in place around the country to make it more difficult for people to vote. So the Democrats have proposed H.R. 1, their first bill of the new Congress, called the For the People Act. It would not only make Election Day a holiday, it would outlaw the purging of voter rolls, create independent redistricting commissions, make voter registration automatic, and more. And there's one more bit of irony behind McConnell's opposition to making voting easier. McConnell says he voted for Lyndon Johnson over Republican Barry Goldwater in 1964 for one reason: voting rights. Goldwater opposed the Civil Rights Act that, among other things, prohibited the unequal application of voter registration requirements. The law made it easier to vote. Rich?
Andrew, thank you very much. Let's bring in our guest, Cenk Uygur. And Cenk, host and founder of the Young Turks. You can see every night right here, 7 to 9 on RNN. Cenk, you know, I'm exhausted getting outraged all the time, but this is nuts. And I have very little hope this will actually get through when it's in the national interest. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, though.
Yeah, look, Mitch McConnell is probably the #1 defender of special interests and donors in this country. And he has pushed for more money in politics through McCutcheon, Citizens United, and all those different cases. So he wants less voter influence and more donor influence. More so than Trump, more so than any other Republican. He's the #1 advocate for more what I would call corruption. So in this case, this bill, through a couple of the provisions, including automatic registration and being able to register on the day of the election, would create 3.8 million additional voters. Through other provisions like making the voting day a holiday, would create 2.7 million more voters. But Republicans don't want more voters. They think that is a power grab by the voters, by democracy. And so Paul Weyrich made this very, very clear back in 1980. I don't want more people to vote. I want less people to vote because our folks who are wealthier, et cetera, vote more consistently. The poor and the middle class vote less consistently. We don't want those people voting because then we'll lose elections. So Mitch McConnell is just basically Paul Weyrich in today's age, and he is trying to limit democracy as much as humanly possible. What is the conclusion of this? The House will pass it. Obviously, McConnell and the Republicans will vote it down in the Senate. Hence, in 2020, when there are more Republicans up for election, you've got to punish them. You got to make them pay the price and say these guys are the ones that are sticking up for donors over voters.
Speaking of elections, we today took earlier Senator Booker's announcement that he's thrown his hat into the ring. You've heard and seen a lot of Democrats livid with Howard Schultz running on a third-party line because they said this only helps Trump's chances come 2020. To that end, wouldn't the same argument apply that the Democrats should try and find a centrist or a Biden type instead of somebody on the progressive side? Because if the only thing that matters is who's going to win, you want to find somebody that's got the best chance to bring along independents?
Yeah, so I have to confess that I don't agree with that premise at all. I think that the progressives are far more likely to bring in independents. Independents are not centrist in the Washington mold. The Washington mold, the centrist means I take corporate money, I compromise with Republicans, I give the rich half the money instead of all of the money, and on and on and on. No, independents prefer populist candidates. That's why Bernie Sanders polled significantly better than Hillary Clinton did against Donald Trump. In fact, on election day, he had a 12-point lead against Donald Trump. And we were told that Hillary Clinton would be the better candidate. Well, she wasn't. She lost. And so I do not want to make that same mistake. I do not want to run a corporate candidate that is not popular with independents and lose to a guy who I think is a monster in Donald Trump. So I think the progressive message resonates far better. And by the way, I don't have to rely on 2016 polling. I can rely on polling today. Medicare for All polls at 70%, bringing up the marginal tax rate. And a Fox News poll polled at 70%. Doesn't get much better than 70%, except Green New Deal polled at 84%. So those progressive positions are very, very popular. Running someone like Cory Booker, who's a good guy and actually has really great accomplishments. I love what he did in criminal justice reform. But running a guy like that who is leans more towards pro-Wall Street positions is not popular and is not centrist in the rest of the country.
All right, Cenk, tell everybody what they can see tonight on the show.
Yes, so we will definitely talk a little bit more about Cory Booker. We're going to give you a lot of details about his career because there's plenty of great things there, and it's great to have him on our team, and I think he's a wonderful senator in a lot of ways. I'm not sure he should be the captain of that team, so we'll talk that through, compare him and juxtapose him to some of the other candidates. We'll also talk about the Republicans losing their minds over the polar vortex. They just cannot wrap their mind around the difference between weather and climate. Unfortunately, they find that their voters are not bright enough to be able to make that distinction. We will make that distinction for them on tonight's program. A judge is bringing back gay conversion therapy, which is, of course, horrific. We will battle against all of those terrible ideas on the Young Turks tonight, as we always do.
And again, you can check it out 7 to 9 tonight on RNN. Cenk, good job, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Richard, Andrew, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
All right, everybody, we're going to be right back to wrap things up. Stay with us.